Awaken my soul, O Mother, that I may see, that I may know and I will believe that all you are and all I can be are but one breath apart, one heartbeat between. You are the all-consuming that brings life into reality, that gives meaning and purpose to the existence of creation. You are all that I am and all that I need. Awaken my soul from too long a sleep. I witness your every ripple of life that makes up my reality, that makes up my life. As I breathe in and out, I become aware that all my energy is aligned everywhere. It flows through the beginning of time that winds through infinity that never dies. This I know to be true as I breathe in and out. I am awakened to truth and have dispelled all my doubt. Such joy and freedom and peace are my constant vibration, as I know you are with me in all my incarnations. I am finally home in a place I desire. Beloved Mother, you are all I desire. I give thanks.
Thank you, Grandmother Rabia and Fred, for being here with us and proving sustainable. Um, that sentiment coming into this conversation is so apropos for where we'd like to go. We really want to talk about life. And we really want to talk about the sustainability of life. Life sustains us, we don't sustain life. And being real clear about the essentiality and the mothering that water does for all life on this planet. Having the two of you who are keeping the Patuxent is just very special to us. And let me start with you, Fred. We come to this broadcast by way of a friend who introduced us many months ago, Caroline Brewer, when you were working with Caroline on the project that she was doing. And my researching you takes me first and foremost to your family's connection to the Patuxent, going back to the 1700s. People of African descent on that river, on the land that they owned. Can you just speak to that?
Well, it's interesting to me, K2, that I didn't really become aware of that legacy until I was an adult. It wasn't as though it was hidden from me. It was something that the family kind of took for granted. And it's fascinating to me that that connection was kind of elusive, like that river that ran near the house. I knew it came from somewhere and went somewhere else, but I didn't quite know what those other places were. I just knew where I was along the course of that river, you know. As an adult and as a riverkeeper, it became my business to kind of really know that river, almost like the back of my hand. And there, I found all kinds of threads of connection that were right there in front of me in my whole life. I just didn't know how to pick them up. You know, that it took engagement, it took struggle, actually, is what it really took for me to actually glean that there was not only a heritage there, but an enormous life force. You know, the pieces kind of fell into place, those other things that I did along the way, at least for me. You know, I mean, I think the work is obviously bigger than Fred Tutman. For that, there's no question. But the work itself had a connection to Fred Tutman that was, I thought, really transformative. Really, I never really knew as much of who I was until I learned what the Patuxent River was about. As strange as that might sound. So why don't I leave it there for now? But that was kind of my journey. I managed to pick up, literally like pickup sticks. Here's a thread of connection. Here's a heritage. Here's a family connection, and it was right there all along, and I never saw it until I had to.
So you were born on the river and grew up on the river, and life led you back to the river and to a deeper understanding of yourself and purpose.
Well, I think it's certainly true. I mean, oddly, my journey for most of my life before I got involved with river keeping, I always thought I was supposed to be in media or television or something like that, helping people tell their stories. It never occurred to me I had a story to tell too. As strange as that seems, those stories really became much more present for me, prescient in some ways too, once I got involved with activism along this river and people dropping their shields and sharing their stories. That's another part of this as well, is that people, once you take the time to get to know what's going on with people and what their connections are, people really will reveal themselves. And that's an extraordinary thing. When people tell you who they are, right? That's also, I think, something that's also very powerful and empowering.
And sharing that connection, and especially affiliated with the river, I love that K2 prefaced how he became connected with you through the prior work with Carolyn Brewer. Do you mind actually then doing the same and introducing Grandmother Rabia to us now and how you are connected with her? And then I would love to hear her perspective. I know she's spoken really profoundly to these broader connections to not only people, the spirit, and our environment at large.
Well, the irony is that while we didn't actually know each other, we were kind of toiling on some threads of the same project about 20 some years ago. The work that I was doing for Ford Foundation in Senegal was with a group that Rabia happened to be well familiar with. In fact, I even edited video footage from an event, I think the Kumbalamba material from St. Helens, where I think you were probably actually present and probably in some of that footage. So it's kind of odd that we would have taken a long way around to bump into each other some 20 years later and then discover we had that kind of shared connection. And let me be clear, that was work that was interacting with traditional healers all over the African diaspora, which has a very strong connection to indigenous medical and herbal practices as well. So as part of the same continuum, oddly enough, we were, like I said, toiling at different ends of the same continuum. Would you want to add to that, Rabia?
Yes, I would just say it was Dr. Charles Finch who brought Madame Fatou Sek from Rufisque in Senegal and her traditional healers, her assistants and her drummers, and they did a ceremony at St. Helena's Island, but they also reached out and they invited the indigenous people from several tribes there who came, and they, with their permission, then we could bring the ceremony there. And so I appreciate that also, is sometimes the indigenous connection gets lost in translation, but we're very clear here too at this river that we are on indigenous land way before that became a thing, that we always honor. The Patuxent is the name of a tribe.
And what is your heritage? Your who are your people?
Everybody. I'm very mixed up. I have indigenous roots. That's what I say. I used to name tribes, and then I thought, well, no, because I am a product of this land. I honor the fact that I do have those bloodlines, but I also have bloodlines from Africa, Ireland, France. And I was at a conference in '98, and when they asked us that same question, and I said, oh, I don't know, I'm like Heinz 57, I got a little of everything. And grandfather William Commanda, who was the wisdom keeper for the Anishinaabe, he said, come here. And I sat down and he looked me in the eye and he said, don't ever deny who you are. You are. And so that's what I am. I feel like I'm a voice for all of those mixed people of this land that are looking for their roots, and their roots are everywhere and widespread. So that's the best I can tell you.
Well, that's awful good. That's awful good. Fred, back to you. The 1700s, the 16 numbers
Mhm.
and your people on that river, land on that river, was that land staked out somehow for Black folk? How did that come about?
Oh, what an intriguing question, because I don't think that race works in quite that way in parts of the South. As much as Maryland was a border state, right? I have relatives and ancestors that come virtually every shade of that crayon box, you know. In some cases, it was fortuitous that I had relatives that were light skinned who were able to obtain land at a time when it was very difficult for people of color, you know, to obtain land. Maybe not illegal, but difficult, because the system, literally institutionally, made it really difficult for us to, you know, find the resources to compete for land, which is obviously a very, you know, prized commodity. So I would say that our connection is not only to the river, but to a particular place. If I'm in a saucy mood, I would say, you know, we didn't have a lot of mobility. We were stuck in one place for generations. You know, as much as we might have wanted to go somewhere, we couldn't figure a better place to go, and so we hung on, right, and made something, you know, out of what we had. And that's not a bad thing by any stretch. I think that's what indigenous people are. They're people who are where they're supposed to be, you know, who occupy space the way people do, and build a connection. They become synonymous with that place in some cases, right? The river runs through their blood, and you know, the places that they know and the frame of reference that they have. You know, I'm a kind of guy that likes to take stock of where I am, and maybe that's what led me into a career early, you know, in television and radio, where I was traveling, and I was essentially sampling places. Now, what's this place like? Is this my home? Is this where I'm really supposed to be? Is this my spirit home? You know, and I found a few places around this planet that really felt like home. Some that obviously really didn't. Like, get me out of here, kind of places. I really, really love where I am, and probably during the pandemic, I got even more attached to it because I was forced to stick around, and there were fewer distractions. But there are other places that I think are incredibly soulful places. Nova Scotia, for example, I think is an extraordinary place along the Breton coast. I've never seen places or felt places like that. The Fundy Bay that has those incredible tides, 13 and 14-foot tides, tides that you can run a power plant. Literally, they have a power plant that they're running on. Argentina is also a place I really fell in love with because it was such a robust culture. The music, the poetry, the passion, the people, the vibe of a place that's really cooking, you know. All of those are places along the way that I found that really, really appeal to me. But the place where I'm home, you know, I mean, maybe I'm over talking it. The difference between domain and turf, right? Turf being where you belong, domain being where you can go. You know, all kinds of places we can go where we don't necessarily belong, right? You know, and maybe the other way around. So I'm very mindful of where my turf is and where it isn't. You know?
Indeed, and that turf, indigeneity being a place of turf, a location where, I mean, I grew up in the Hudson Valley, and no place feels like the Hudson Valley. Even though I would not go back there to live now, it's still home. I still consider it home. And so I very, very much identify with that, and identify with those other places, Southern California and the Mojave. Rabia, home is home. I heard you mention St. Helena's. Is home the Patuxent area? Is home Maryland? Where is home? Where's your place?
The Pacific
besides
Ocean.
Everywhere.
The Pacific Ocean. I grew up in California, and I'm a Pacific Ocean kid. And that is where home is. It's not even necessarily the land, but the ocean itself. My father took us, we went as children, actually. We went to the mountains, we went to the desert. We went, we were at the ocean a lot. He and a lot of our relatives like to fish. And then we just like to be at the ocean all the time, me and my two sisters and my brother. But for me, that's a place where my spirit, when I need rejuvenation, if I go back to the Pacific Ocean, that's where I become alive again. That feeds my soul. And I can say that, the Patuxent is a place that has welcomed me, this river, by the way of Fred. Fred has been, when I first met him, actually, a friend of mine brought me here to do ceremony and Carol, and it was a connection that was immediately to this river. And so having done many ceremonies here and being honored to stay here right now and be able to go out and pray in the morning and talk to the water and all things around here, I'm reminded over and over and over by the spirits of the people of the Patuxent and other indigenous people. They haven't gone anywhere, and they have been gracious to accept me here in this space. But my spirit always travels to that Pacific Ocean, because that's what feeds me.
All right. All right. Fred, in what ways has your work as a riverkeeper been informed by the beliefs and practices of indigenous peoples regarding how a human being is meant to exist in relationship to a living earth?
I think there are some truths that are common to many faiths and belief systems. I've always felt the presence of some great force when in nature, and I've spent a lot of years trying to get as close to that force as possible. I'm a pretty accomplished backpacker, kayaker, way off the trail, way off to trails that are less traveled, basically, particularly because I think it's important for us to experience these things firsthand, not on the Discovery Channel and, not third party, but to actually walk the landscape or get on the water and actually go someplace or climb that mountain, and it's just with some sense of loss I found with age and arthritis. It's increasingly hard for me to have that kind of mobility. These days I'd be pretty reluctant to be as far off the grid as I've been in some of my past exploits. But I will say that my own belief system is very connected to this, I don't know what to call it, maybe an esoteric sense of a presence. To me, the creator is not a big guy with looking like Burl Eyes, sitting on a throne somewhere up on high. I like the idea that nature and the creator is something that's connective and connected to all of us. So the idea of being a community organizer, where community is being defined by a river or a place or people who have a particular place in common, is actually pretty exciting work for me. I'm all about community, all about, grew up in kind of a small community, rural community, a farming community, a place where people were not only connected to land, but they set their internal clock based on the cropping cycles. Is it tobacco season? Are the fish running this month? I mean, all these clues and markers we had around us that were largely defined by nature. Nature really defined kind of our lives in that respect. So the question you asked is really about my belief system. One of the things that attracted me to the Waterkeeper movement was its founder, who got up and made a speech, and he said that God speaks to you more acutely in nature than anywhere else, which is why you find in every scriptural basis, every religion, people are going to the desert or to the mountain or to the ocean or wherever they go, the volcano, wherever they go, to try and find some closer connection to nature. And that was such an extraordinary thing for me to hear, not because I didn't already know it, but because I'd never heard environmentalists say it. Mostly I heard environmentalists talk about science. And I wasn't a science denier, but I understood that this was more than science, that nature is more than just the science of it. Let me put it that way. In fact, I think if you focus entirely on the nature, I think you'll miss the boat in terms of what nature is all about. You'll lose context, right? Indigenous people, people of color, I think we have a different context for these resources than other folks. You know, it's a mindset as much as anything. I don't think it's a skin color. It's a mindset, you know? So
one of our guiding council members, Nicole McIntosh, refers to it as maroon mindset.
that's interesting.
And I just love that term because it just really hits home with me. And what really hit home with me, being a retired, I'll put it that way, a retired traditional African drummer from West Africa, from the Mandate speaking people, was your background as a blacksmith. I mean, we know you as a journalist. We know you as an attorney. We know you as an activist. We know you as a river keeper. From my understanding and education about blacksmithing in West Africa, blacksmithing feeds all those things that you became. So I'm really interested in your blacksmithing. And are you still smithing?
Oh, absolutely. I'm very much in love with metallurgy and fascinated by the way that humans have taken these products of the earth, literally for centuries, and made them into the hardest substance that human beings can possibly make. And you know, that's a double-edged sword, right? Because quite frankly, most of what we know in the technological civilization is rooted in advanced metallurgy, the ability to build bridges and skyscrapers and railways and all the stuff that we take for granted in the mechanized world is largely founded upon metallurgy. And then the ability for us to command or control the metallurgy, right? The Romans, you know, they invaded other places to get the metallurgy because they had lousy metal, basically. Their swords broke. If they had a sword fight and two folks at their swords, they were brittle and they broke. So they would go and invade Spain or wherever they could to really extract the products of metallurgy, something that's quite ingenious, something that humans figured out how to make. I can't imagine how. Same with beer, by the way, and whiskey. I mean, how would you do those things by accident? I mean, how would you stumble across those things in the kitchen? I was trying to make this other thing, but I ended up making Glenlivet. You must have, you know, it must have taken generations for people to figure that out. And it's the same with metal.
Yeah, I think those things came by way, and Rabia, I think you can speak to this, came by way of relationship with the unseen, came by way of those intelligences that live with us but that we don't see, but are communicating with us at all times and all times and climes. Rabia, can you speak to the linkages between spirit and the river and the work that you're doing now and how that ties into Fred's deep background? I mean, the two of y'all are so boom that it's like, okay, well, how did this magic show up here?
Oh boy. Well, first of all, because his heart is open. His heart and spirit wasn't open, this would not have happened. So the fact that Fred is a very spiritual person, and you can see it when he's standing out there or even alone looking at the river and stuff. You can see his aura and how connected he is to this water, to the landscape, and how and it's a truly heartfelt thing. You can't lie about something like that because your eye is the window of the soul, as they say, and you can see it in his eyes. And so therefore, him being receptive to my coming there and doing ceremony and then coming back and doing more ceremonies. And so I believe that Spirit, I know Spirit always guides every movement that we make. And what is going on here at this river and all over the world, the awakening that is happening, because we're in the age of the divine feminine as she has risen to try to bring balance onto this planet and the madness that's ensuing around that. I know that in a ceremonial space, which is every breath in and every breath out, you're always in ceremony. Even people don't realize that everything they repeatedly do and say becomes ritual. And we have ritualized so many things. And so trying to then, like I do ceremonies for the full moon. And I did ceremonies here at this river for the full moon and I do it at other times as well. And the amount of energy that people bring when you open and show them that connection, how the moon will be behind clouds, but when you call her out and she says, okay, it's our time, those clouds will part and she'll shoot up into the sky and people are amazed. And I just chuckle because I'm like, well, she said, came, you showed up. Well, she did too, right? So, and the same thing, it's like when you're in stillness and you allow just yourself to just nobody's mind. I think I haven't mastered making my mind be quiet, just like my mouth. So it's just, but when you're in that presence and you can become one and quiet and receptive to it, you start to notice the nuances and the energy of everything. So you'll notice how the trees are vibrating, how the water is vibrating, how the birds and the animal and the fish are jumping, and you're praying and the fish are jumping up out of the water so that their eye is making contact with yours and they like, I hear you, right? And you're like, hey, I got you too. And it's just like all of these things, because once we start to realize that we are mostly water, the river is water, we have that affinity and connection for each other. And when we allow ourselves to be open to that and we give her back constantly, I pour fresh water back into the river, but I pray over it for the health of the river first, that everywhere that water goes, every atom of every cell becomes healed, happy, and whole, and with gratitude and love for being there and sustaining us. And so all of those things that partake of it, it's like when I'm so blessed to be part of the children's camps that we're doing here. And one of the things that I teach the children is energy. And I'm like, okay, so you are an energetic field, but so is that tree. And you can communicate with that tree. You can communicate with these plants. How did things come about in terms of food and making whiskey or whatever? It's because those plants have guided you to those things. You had a necessity, you asked, you wondered, you opened yourself up for it, and they fed you the information so that you were able to do those things. And so if we live in that world where we're constantly out of our own ego and knowing that everything on this planet has a right to be, everything is not, we're not the top dogs on the planet, which our behavior shows, but everything has a right to be healthy and to live here because we're part of this earth. We don't live on her. We are an outgrowth and part of her.
Wow. Kelsey, you want to jump in?
I'm sitting here with an open heart, taking it all in. It's so profound. I really deeply appreciate all of it. No, I'll let you keep going, K2.
Okay. Fred?
There's a children's book that I really love that really affected me. There are several, but there's one more recently. It's called Paddle to the Sea. It's about a little boy. It's a beautifully illustrated book. You can find it cheaply on virtually any bookseller. And it's a little boy who has a boat and decides to see where the stream near him leads to in order to get to the ocean when he realizes that all water is connected. And it's about his adventures as he tries to paddle to the sea. Beautiful book. And it's a story about life. The other story that really affected me as a boy was The Water Babies by Charles Kingsley. It's a British story about an afterlife of children who have not a good place in this world, who end up going to a place under the sea where they have also all kinds of interesting adventures and so on, but it's another life kind of under the sea. And The Water Babies is also a very beautiful parable, very beautiful story. Sounds like Rabia is familiar with it.
Oh yeah.
As well. Yeah.
Fred, your life is kind of a parable. I mean, the transitions that you have gone through to get here to where you are is kind of a parable itself. How did you get into how and why did you get into journalism and then leave journalism to become an attorney and take that lawyering to back to the people as an activist? What's the story behind it?
Well, I've always been fascinated by what people have to say. I've always been interested in people, and I thought media and radio and television, particularly in the 60s and 70s when I was coming up, TV wasn't what it is today, that's for sure. And I came from a family of people who had access to television careers. I have, sisters that are also involved in media careers and cousins, and my father was involved in on-air work as well. So I really was fascinated by the idea that if you really wanted to get some idea out into the world, that you had to really learn the language of humanity, the communicative arts. And so I was always fascinated by theater and by poetry and by all the many different ways that humans and others communicate. And into getting a master's degree, actually, in applied communications. Okay. And so what I found, however, was that in the media, like television and radio, you really work for big, powerful corporations. That we don't really have as much control over the media, at least we didn't. I think now we have blogs and so many other outlets, so many other ways for people to say what's on their mind. And I think that's a great thing. But back in the day, really, if you wanted to make a living doing television stuff, you really had to work for a network or be involved with commercial television or radio. And that was frustrating, quite frankly. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that commercial television will not and does not cover, will not look at. I found us going to foreign countries and watching people suffer and documenting that, but doing nothing to change it, nothing. And that really bothered me. I really saw that as we being a part of a problem, not so much a part of a solution. So the law school thing was a long stretch because I had a really rocky academic background. I had a master's degree, but no bachelor's degree. Long story. Law schools weren't too eager to see me, and I was 40 years old. And mostly I didn't really want to practice law, but I wanted to study. I wanted to learn what made the world tick. I'd seen one side of things, and the law school education really opened a lot of windows and doors for me, ladders even, things that I saw that I didn't understand, that I hadn't understood in my media career, kind of fell into place like tumblers in a lock. Like I had made films for the EPA on RCRA and CERCLA and stuff like that. In law school, I got to study what those laws actually meant and what those films actually had been about. And so that was hugely informative. In the end, I went to the last semester and stopped. So I never actually finished law school. I've been able to teach in law schools and I've been able to use the legal education, but it would take me probably another 6 months to go back and finish those last courses. But in the meantime, I got what I wanted. I got what I wanted from that education. I got both the contacts, the knowledge base, the skills, the writing skills in particular. Lawyering is a club, and I got access to that club. And that's, I think, was much more useful. I'm at heart not as much of a lawyer as I am an activist. In fact, I'm probably a much better activist than I am a lawyer. And those skills that I learned in law school have paid for themselves so many times since. So that's the connection. Again, I hope that wasn't too, like I said, that wasn't much of a soundbite, but that's the full story, is my frustration with inability to change anything in the media. We can only talk about it and tell about it, and they weren't our stories to tell in some cases.
And so connecting to the stories of the people who live on the Patuxent, where you began, because you started this when, in 2004?
2004. Yeah, it flew by fast because I was going to do this for 5 years. That was my plan. I thought, as long as I can afford to do this stuff.
You were only going to do it for 5 years. Okay. All right.
That was my plan. Yeah.
20 years later. Okay. All right. So in 2004, who were you?
I was exiting law school. I had been working for a state's attorney in Prince George's County in the homicide division. That was a different window to law than the environmental stuff. I was exhausted. I had also, one of the reasons I also had kind of stopped law school near the end was my father had gotten sick, and I ended up taking over his business, mostly to save his retirement. The end goal was to save his pension and retirement because the business was struggling under the weight of the people, his ex-partners, his former business partners who had bought the place. So my mother and I actually ended up taking over that business and gussying it up and reselling it so that we could save the old man's pension. So I was beat because there was a lot of fighting and struggle involved in that. My father was waning from strokes, and so we were struggling to save his marbles, to put it bluntly. So it was a very stressful time for me, and I stumbled across this river keeping thing, and it just blew my mind. Like, oh my gosh, I had no idea you could make a living doing that. And I think you can, but it's tough. It's tough to make a living doing that. It's tough angering the establishment. It's tough suing rich polluters. It's tough for people of color to make our own way and be ourselves in movements where we're only an afterthought for the most part. People just assume that we live in deplorable environmental circumstances because we lack initiative. I've had people say that to me. Actually, why don't those people clean up that neighborhood? You know, if they had any initiative, they'd pick up all that trash, or they'd fix these problems. We did. And I think that's the tragedy of the environmental movement. It's dominated really by a perspective of white access and privilege. It doesn't occur, I think, to people in those bigger movements that we struggle with different problems environmentally. As much as we're all breathing air and drinking water and all that stuff, these are very different paradigms that guide our ability to access those things if you're a person of color in America. For one, your diversity, which is not even a thing. Diversity? What's that? Is that, is that something I can take to the bank? Is that something I can rely on? What is diversity, and who gets to decide what's diverse and what's not? I mean, I think it's a ridiculous way for these movements that think they're going to save the planet to just sideline us immediately by assuming that we don't have anything to offer except some diversity. It's actually depressing sometimes. There's so much out here to be done, and there's so much that we can do. And yet, like I said, we're sidelined more often than not because the space is claimed by people who, haven't really managed to save much of anything because we're not there. That's I think the real tragedy here. These would be better movements if they were much more inclusive and much more thoroughly connected to a community basis.
Are those movements really, as from your perspective, are those movements really intended to bring change and to bring healing? Or are those movements really there to continue the status quo?
Yeah, I think they're there to protect the social status quo surrounding the environment, right? If you've ever been a person of color on a ski slope in Oregon and see how that feels, right? As people look at you, really no different than they would look at you if you were a black person on a dance floor, right? Because they're competitive with us there too, It's alarming because it means that we're vetted consistently in these movements, that we, like I said, have a difficult time being ourselves, and that most assume that those are wonderful and swell movements even without us in them, which is, I think, the biggest stumbling block of all, because the reach is not great to diversify or make these movements more inclusive. The presumption is that the existing players who founded these movements, who control them, are more than sufficient, but it just looks bad. So we should collect some diversity. We should, maybe put a person of color out front to answer the phone. We do all of this stuff to really restrain the enormous energy in Black and brown communities, the enormous passion that these communities have for the environment. It's really, I think, being restrained by these movements that have a very monolithic point of view, right? That environmentalism is a membership endeavor, and that you have to appease as many rich and wealthy people as possible in order to save the world, which I think is also kind of like, really? Like, really? Big wealth and big corporations, they're going to save the planet?
And that colonial mindset that imperialist and colonial mindset that you face on a daily basis with your work. And yet, what you get from you is a sense of buoyancy and a sense of life and hope that is resistance in its best sense. How do the two of you bring that hope and that buoyancy, that resilience to the communities that you deal with along the Patuxent?
Well, that's the blacksmithing effect, actually, right? Mm-hmm. Working something, it's hot in that kitchen, you're massaging it, you're molding it, you're putting your will and your strength against something that is yielding, but with difficulty, right? Any good piece of steel is going to fight you, going to hold back its charms. You have to really work it, and you have to know that work piece. You have to get to know it. It's the same with many of the farm things that I do. I notice when I'm working on that tractor, you really become one with the machine. You're feeling the vibration of that motor, and you're feeling the land literally vibrating up through the wheels, up into the steering wheel, and you're a part of it. And I think it's the same with activism and being on this river. You're a part of this energy force, and that's rejuvenating, that's sustainable, that's energizing, you know, and they're folding that energy from communities, helping them regain some semblance of self-governance, some control over their own environment, really unleashing these powerful forces, human forces wrapped up within these natural forces. And I think, again, those are better movements. Those are better movements where people, than ones where people raise lots and lots of money, and the planet's still in a heck of a lot of trouble. You know? These are professionally successful movements where people have jobs and careers and pay mortgages and send kids to college, but they're insufficient to save the planet. A, they lack the moral basis to interfere with the environment of people who are not in these movements. And B, they don't have the mass. They don't have the momentum and mass that you would have from a truly authentic movement that can rally people, excite people, inspire people, capture not just their wallets, but their hearts and minds too. Those are better movements. There's no question in my mind. And that mere thought is energizing. I get up every morning excited to go to work because I realize I'm working with something that's bigger than me, bigger than my zip code, bigger than my river, really. It's an energy force that goes unrequited, I think, in bigger, greener movements for various priorities of their own, you know, appeasing capitalism, you know, vindicating their sense of entitlement about various things that, you know, not all of us have had access to, right? That's why you have movements, for example, in the Bay that talk about saving crabs and oysters. They never talk about saving people in communities. They're always talking about, save the seafood. Yeah, save the seafood first, as though that's the high road. These are misguided movements.
Rabia?
Oh.
Go ahead, Kelsey.
Okay. Well, we're both thinking of you, Rabia, following up on that. Would love to hear, you referenced earlier, right now is the great time of the feminist energy and age, and that feminine approach to addressing and mending past patriarchal colonial harms and efforts. And drawing off of what Fred was just speaking about, would love to hear your insights on what are key considerations, questions, and approaches for those to take who want this collective community approach for moving forward.
I would start with humility and respect, because there's so much ego in these movements, and people thinking that, you know, every time somebody says to me, yeah, I'm going to save the earth, I'm out there doing it, and I'm thinking, but do you realize she's sentient? do you also realize that she's got her own spirit and energy, and she's got her own idea of what she wants to do? And we witness this. And when there's, like, I remember I was in Kauai with my sisters, and it was during the time Kilauea was erupting. And there were all these meetings we were watching on TV once in a while of people, that were just, oh my God, we're losing all this land, the volcano's erupting, it's doing this, it's doing that. And the Hawaiian people were at these meetings. And so, and the very traditional Hawaiian people, they were like, okay, but you're talking about, oh, my vacation home is being destroyed and this and that and the other. And she said, and we're giving thanks for being allowed to live here as long as we have. And if you need to do something else, then we honor that as well. You've given us a warning, we'll get out the way. They watched how the lava flow went, and it moved, and it went around the schools and in certain areas, and safeguarded those particular things, which was very mindful and spirit driven. And so there's a deeper knowledge that Indigenous people have and have retained, and they retain it from generation through generation, and may not know all of the rituals or all the things. A lot of people lost their languages, especially when this country was invaded, which is, it's the perspective of there's never going to be enough for some people. People came to this country that were persecuted, but then persecuted and killed the people that lived here. And now they want to say, who else can come? Well, you're not welcome here, because now you're encroaching on our space, while you have people indigenous to this land who are suffering and living in horrible conditions. And so it's all a matter of perspective but they're still doing their traditional things. They're still, as much as they can, are honoring the earth and all those things that so-called new agers want to, everybody's smudging now, but they don't realize that all that sage they're selling and all that, there is a certain amount of anything that can be given without over harvesting and then decimating something. And people are, same thing with fishing and introducing other species. And it's a matter of mindset. It's not, this river's not here, or any body of water, just to entertain you, for you to ride your jet skis or whatever, and you jet ski past probably places where I know that people don't even, like Fritz said, you don't know what's going on in those communities along the river. He does. But most people don't give that a thought. They don't give a thought to, again, the Patuxent has the name of a tribe that used to exist, living, breathing people whose spirits are still here. Same thing with the Potomac, same thing with the Anacostia. All of these rivers that have these indigenous names of people, and they don't even realize that every time you say Patuxent, you're giving energy to that tribe and to those spirits. By naming, calling their name, you are feeding their spirits and their resilience. They're here, and so I think that, and I'm probably way off whatever you asked me, but that's how I go. But anyway, I just feel like, when you can't see and have kindness for everything, if you can't have kindness for the trees, for the plants, for the bugs, for the animals, then you can't have kindness for people either. And you won't care what happens in their communities and what that looks like. And you don't care that they don't have fresh, clean water, because you've got yours, and you don't care that, what people's actions are doing are causing fires all over the world, but you react when it becomes something that personalized is you. If it impacts you and you can't go outside because they're saying the air quality index is toxic to you, then you're griping about that. But what was your contribution to that? But what about the people every day that don't have clean water, don't have clean air, that are being bombed in their countries? That, I feel like if you just go out in nature, if you want to speak for a movement, you want to say you're doing all these things. Fred and I were at something recently that they'll probably tell him never to bring me back to, because I was listening to all of these people that were talking about the Patuxent, but nobody invited the Patuxent Riverkeeper to sit there and to have anything to say, but everybody else was lauding themselves about all the stuff that they were doing to safeguard this river. And I'm thinking, but your riverkeeper's right here, but you can't see him and you don't want to give him a voice. You don't want him to come up here and say the things that he's doing. And then I'm thinking about, okay, well, you want to talk about all you're doing to save this and you're so proud of yourself, but you contributed to this. It wasn't our people. They want to talk about people, and like Fred said, black and brown people, but let's talk about so-called red people who aren't really red, but anyway, indigenous people who have held the space that people have always farmed. They've always had gardens. And they love nature and they love to be in nature, and they talk about nature in their writing and their songs and their love songs about, you know, how love flows and grows and how the light is. And so those that are in these big green movements that are propping up the people that are destroying the planet, I'm like, can we just take a step back and take a breath and say, okay, what are you really doing? I'm talking to people from tribes that are saying they're putting windmills there and they're saying, oh, there's this new wonderful thing that it's doing, but what's it at the cost to what? Okay, so they know that those windmills are causing harm to the environment. And people that are now, they're saying, oh yeah, everybody should have solar panels, but the solar panels, the things they're made of don't break down and can't be back infused. They're toxic and can't go back into the earth. We need to be more aware. And if we planted more trees, and then somebody was telling me recently, which I wasn't aware of, that whales produce more oxygen. It was my friend Lisa. She said, do you understand that whales produce more oxygen than the trees do, than the rainforest does? And I was like, no, I wasn't aware. And she said, yes, but we're destroying them too. It's like anything we can destroy, we will destroy. The collective, bigger out there, but the everyday people that are going about their lives trying to survive. We were at something one time at the Anacostia, and we had young people there. And one girl said, I grew up in Anacostia. We knew the river was right there. I never got to see it until I'm a teenager now. And she was astounded looking at it. And she said, and the way that it is here over by Navy Yard and stuff, it doesn't look like that where it flows through art. And she said, and when you're in such poverty or you've got violence on your street, the last thing you're thinking about is that there's this awesome river there that you can go to and feed your soul, right? So, you know, we need to be more aware. And the other thing is spiritually, when you become one and you start to open your spirit up, all the answers are there. The trees are constantly talking. And they're like, well, why don't you acknowledge me? Why don't you, you're picking things, you're eating things. And then when it's not there, then you're griping about it. But what did you do to help it survive? President Evo Morales, and then I'll be quiet, had this, we went to this conference where he had people come from all over the world and his tribal people when they were blocked out of the Kyoto thing. And we wrote a document, the rights of Mother Earth, that he took to the UN and said, she is a sentient being. She has every expectation and right to be healthy and to live. And bombing her and digging her insides out and all the things that we are doing to this earth that we want to live on her and say, we want to enjoy parts of her body that are pleasant for us. He's like, but do you give her a thought? You cannot continue like this. Indigenous people have been saying this forever and they're being murdered because of it. So all these big green movements, if you're not speaking for all of the people on this planet, if you're not bettering the lives and you don't see that everything is connected, and if you can't come out there for all of them, then you're not doing anything except the status quo. I'm saving this for my kids, for my generation, the eugenicists, all those kinds of people. Mother said, I don't make differences over my children. When she says that to me, she's not saying just racially, she's saying the animals, the plants, the bugs, the water, all of these things that she breathes life into to her are just as important as anything else. And when we learn this and treat things that way, we won't have all these problems. I'll be quiet.
All my relations.
All my relations.
All my relations.
And they are.
Yes. Yes, we are all related. And that was such a beautiful expression of maroon mindset. And it's maroon mindset that people are calling indigeneity today. That is the healing vibration. It is the healing force. That is the healing wave that the two of you are riding and working. And as healers, because I mean, Fred, you entered the movement of healers in 2004 and have been learning and growing and becoming more of a conduit for that force ever since, and now aligned with a spirit keeper and truth speaker. What measurable impact are you seeing in the communities that you engage? And I'm really thinking about, is it Eagle Harbor?
Yeah, there's several neighborhoods, towns, municipalities that we've worked with up and down the river. Eagle Harbor is one, Brandywine's another, Lothian is another. Working Piney Orchard right now. We pretty much work up and down the course of this 7-county river. We spread the work around. Some of the work people would call, I think, environmental justice. Some of it not necessarily. I mean, I think we try to have the heart of what the river's needs are, and we're looking for collaborations with communities that value those types of working relationships, right? I mean, we want to try and connect these separate battles up and down the river. You know, the communities we work with are ones that are typically activist communities. There's something they want to fix, something they want to change, something they want to get ahead of, you know, whether it's sea rise or that those smokestacks right next door, or that awful industrial facility in the community, or they haven't been heard or listened to by the authorities and they need to either assert or take control of their environmental voice. Basically, I think that's important for communities to be able to self-govern, own their own successes, and more importantly, pay that forward, retain those successes within the community so that they are sustainable in the sense that they're self-maintaining, that they feed into the power of the community, that you are mentoring leadership from within the community. I mean, you're making really much more robust communities by virtue of people getting together and working on these common concerns about water, air, and land, things that are very much in jeopardy. There's no question that, you know, 20 years ago, I think people would have broke out laughing if you tried to sell them some bottled water. Right? It's only a matter of time before they'll be bottling that air. Right? And virtually everything else will be either shrink wrapped, you know, or, you know, retailed. So we're in a battle to change the system. There's no question, right? If an environmentalist doesn't see that this world is broken and that the environmental problems are a consequence of that, then, as Rabia said, you're not doing anything at all. If you think you're doing cute little projects with storm drains and rain barrels and all that kind of stuff, and that's going to change the fate of this world, I guarantee you it will not. I heard Elon Musk on YouTube last night talking about Mars and how many people need to die before we can successfully establish a colony there. I'm telling you, Mars is a pretty rotten deal compared to what we have right here in front of us if we don't get busy. We don't get busy. If we blow this mess up, I guarantee you Mars will not be a good compensation. For one, there ain't no water. I mean, they keep being aspirational about it. We found a teaspoon. We found an ice crystal. The truth is, there's no water. Right? We're not going to live in Mars. Not going to happen. Let alone that the rich guys have control of that. Right? We're not even on the guest list. We're not even on the passage.
Rabia, you mentioned before, right, your home affiliated with the Pacific Ocean. And Right, you just referenced Mars, right? These bigger, wealthy aspirations to go elsewhere where there's no water. And I wanted to bring back to either of you to answer around often, right, is particularly in reference to oceans, there's so much about water and our bodies of water on the earth that are unknown or that are misunderstood or overlooked by the common populations and even scientists to certain degrees. So are there certain key considerations that listeners should be aware of when it comes to what we should know about water that's often misunderstood or overlooked, that you find really integral to your work and messages?
Yeah, I don't think people have a sense of scale of how scarce water really is. Drinkable water, potable water, water that's not contaminated, water that doesn't have forever chemicals in it, right, is actually really scarce. And it's a non-renewable resource. All the water that we have is all the water that we have, right? It's in continual renewal, right? Rainwater, oceans, the aquifers in the ground. It's all part of the same water chain or water system, or what they call hydrologic cycle. And we're steadily taking water out of circulation by virtue of making it poison, essentially, right? The background radiation in those oceans you just mentioned has been rising steadily year after year from scuttled nuclear reactors and other stuff. There's stuff we're not going to get back. We've made some damage on this little mud ball of ours. And it's not enough just to recycle. We have to change what we're doing. We don't need more research. We don't need more studies. I don't think we even need more scientists. We need more activists. We need more people to get really vocal and really active and really organized. And the more active and organized you are, I guarantee you, the cleaner your air and water will be. It's happened again and again. Everywhere I've been in this work along this river, when people start making a lot of noise about their environment, they get action. Now, if people are waiting for the government to come save them, or a helicopter, or for Elon Musk to take them to Mars, very different circumstances. But I'm telling you, the people we want to work with at Patuxent Riverkeeper, people prepared to struggle. Not fight, because fighting sounds violent. We're not about violence. We're about struggle. We're about that blacksmithing effect, right? Hot in the kitchen, working on that hard piece, using the products of the earth, fire, oxygen, air. Great stuff. Wonderful stuff can come out of it. You can take something as ugly as sin and make it into something gorgeous and beautiful, something extraordinary.
Useful.
And useful. That will outlive all of us. Everything I've made in the blacksmith shop will outlive me. Everything.
And life will outlive us all.
Yeah.
We may not be here, but life will be here.
Oh, absolutely. Because when you look at when a volcano erupts and you've got all of that molten lava, and then you see a green plant come out, sprout up through that. Okay, so enough said, right? But the other thing is with the oceans and the pollution and all of those things, and there is so much about water in the oceans that we don't even know. I mean, it's fascinating to see when they can send those deep things down there, and you see all of those gorgeous beings that light up all these different colors that wouldn't have known that they were there. Just like until we start looking at things under microscopes, we wouldn't know there was a rich and thriving things in the water that are alive and that are continuous. Even when we're not, they'll be there. Elon Musk and the rest of them, the other part of this is, and yeah, I'm out there anyway. So we're not the only thing in the universes. Mm-hmm. And so there are other sentient and more intelligent beings than we are that have visited this earth. There's proof all over the place and various cultures and things that there are, and we know that they've been coming, and we know that they're still coming, and we'll know in larger numbers that they're here. But the point is that, we're not the only habitable planet. We're not the only so-called intelligent life force that is out there. And so he can go to Mars all he wants to, but I really believe that they all are watching this planet. You think they're going to let you take all your crazy out there? I don't think so. They're more intelligent and they've been around longer than we have. And so that's the other part that people discount all the time, is that we're not the only game in town. We're not the only so-called thriving, intelligent life force that is what they want to believe is that, because they can go out into Mars and other places and try to destroy that and the moon and all these other things. But we know that other planetary beings have been coming. They've been in the ocean. They still are. They've been, I went to Guatemala and a farmer took us up on a ridge, and he was saying, when I was a young boy, my grandfather would bring me up here and we would stand here and we'd watch the ships come in and out of the mountain. And he said, and you see in many cultures and stuff where there's interaction. I believe honestly that once we get out of everything, to me that is so destructive comes from ego. And it's this need for people, organizations, whatever, to think that they're more intelligent, they've got more power than everybody else. And so they wield that power to enrich themselves and more. They can never, it's like King Midas, they can never have enough. People like that never have enough, and you can never feed them enough because they're lacking in something that you cannot fill unless it's spiritual. And so that big hole that they keep piling more stuff on, and more wealth and more this and more greed to try to fill something in themselves that's not at everybody else's expense, that is not going to be filled that way. Dr. Emoto, I know everybody probably knows about Dr. Emoto's research where he looked at drops of water under a microscope, and then he said kind things to one vial, and then looked under there and it looked like beautiful snowflakes would look. He said horrible things to another one and it was all deformed and ugly and misused. If we're that much water in our body and we're saying things, we're doing things to each other, not to mention all the plants and everything else that are mostly water. If you can keep in your mind that all those harsh things that you're doing, saying, and are taking that water inside people and causing illness and causing, it doesn't take more to say something kind and loving than it does to say something mean and nasty or do something like that. So I believe that the foundation of it all goes back to spirit, that no matter what else we're doing, if you don't have spirit, if you don't have the consciousness or the heart to want things to improve and to do better and make things better for other people, then I don't care what you're doing, because it's always going to fail. It's always going to fail. It may look like success, but the underpinnings of it always collapse. So these communities that Fred works with, and they have the heart to try to change and better something that's going on. And so they call upon somebody who has the heart to help them to do that. And they will see change. How long that change lasts, we don't know. But, it is possible to move the needle. The kids in the rainforest that survived out there and everybody's in awe, well, because they lived there. They were one with their environment. They knew how to survive because they became one with that environment, which allowed them to do that. Yet and still, they're the backward, the ignorant, the ones that need to be killed because they're in the way of logging and all of that stuff. Our frame of reference as humans needs to change. So I just feel like, coming back to the long and the short of it is, I was talking to somebody, more and more people now, again, I'm going out there, are talking about they are seeing mer people. They have been around for thousands of years in the ocean, on rivers. They are true beings. And when you see fairy tales and other things, everything, all those stories come from somewhere, right? Somebody saw something that they then talked about, and it becomes, in every culture has some stories. The Silkies in Ireland, there are other things, other intelligent life forms on this planet that we need to consider are doing their work as we're doing our work, and those that are destructing, there are other things that are at play too. And so I just feel like if people could open their hearts and their minds and their spirit enough to say, I have clean drinking water, And I'm blessed to have that, but I want that for everybody else. So I'm going to do the things that is necessary to make that happen. And what Fred was saying, I was just thinking, I saw something where Arizona, that is water deficit there, and they now have given some other country all of those acres and acres of water to make something else. I don't even remember what it is because it just blew my mind when I saw that. And I'm like, what about all the people that have a gallon of water for one family, but now you're giving some corporation all of this access to clean water that won't be consumed by people or animals? It's mind-boggling. So what do we think about that?
We live with ever expanding and exploding contradictions, and we are either supporting or resisting those contradictions. We're either promoting or trying to heal those contradictions. There are sides in this environmental war that we are in. And the work that you do is so critically important because it deals with the primary life force for this planet, which is water, and which is the rivers that flow into the ocean. And understanding, grandmother, what you say about the preeminence of spirit, and that we are in a period now where the feminine is in rising, is ascending, is in the ascendant, and that mother knows how to take care of her faithful children, and she knows how to dispose of those who do not obey the law. Being clear about that is what I have seen in the work that the two of you are doing from the beginning. And just want to support and salute you for that work and for the energy that you bring to it, and for the spirit of resilience and resistance that you lift up as our ongoing history. That's our history. We're people who have been resisting this oppression from the outset, not a people who have been joining the resistance. We've been in resistance. We've been in resistance to this oppression from the beginning. And just jumping backwards to what we do here at Proven Sustainable in trying to bring to public consciousness the fact that there are people in the world who have some sense and that know how to live on this planet and with this planet and with all our relations. What can you tell us that in looking at our site that we need to do, or that we can enhance? What more can we do to support the work that you and indigenous and maroon peoples are doing?
We need to commune, connect, and as I said earlier, I think we need to organize. I think we need to mentor. I think we need to help each other. I think we have to. I'm a strong believer in the power of community, and I think we build community in much the same way we build family. We work at it. You know, we invest ourselves in each other. Obviously, there are lots of different communities out there.
Right.
Not all of them are for us. I do think movements that are committed to the liberation of all people are movements that have a particular type of, I won't say divine, but a certain energy attached to them. They're righteous movements, not just self-righteous, but righteous movements. And by virtue of that, they have a certain energy that is really unstoppable, actually, particularly once people really start connecting with each other and amplifying. And there are lots of belief systems that believe in that, right? People who drum together, chant together, they connect in various ways to pool their energy, to pull together. I do think that these bigger green movements have harnessed the wrong energy. They're trying to build corporations. They're trying to build big, toothy organizations that are too big picture, I think, to glean the individual stories that people bring to the table. People get lost in those movements. It's a form of corporatism, actually, because the corporate mission becomes more important than the individuals in the organization. And I don't know that those are movements for everybody. Over the years, I've watched people take great joy from those other movements, and who am I to judge? But instead, I set out to try and organize the type of organization I myself would like to join. And that is a movement that is soulful, that is connected, that where everyone, regardless of what they look like and what they believe, are welcome. You know, when we started that summer camp, it's true, we tried pretty hard to make sure we reached out to communities of color, but we never once turned away a person who wasn't. Never once. That's not how we roll at all. As much as we got phone calls from kind of indignant sounding people saying, oh, you're going to exclude white kids? Holy cow. What kind of world would that be? I mean, I do think we have a lot of healing to do. We need to get better at talking to each other. Like I said, we need to get past race. Race and racism are expensive, man. They're killing this country and this society. They're shredding it every day on the front page of the newspaper. We're seeing some of its fallout. Biggest game in town. We can't even get around to working on saving the planet until we can learn to talk to each other and work together.
Have empathy for each other, which
Indeed.
is lacking, you know. And
Indeed.
it's interesting. Yeah, there were a few emails that I saw where people were like, so are white kids welcome at the camp? And I was like, of course. And we do have a mixed group of kids that comes to this camp. And the last one we had, there was, you know, Caroline, who lives on a horse farm up the street, and she's been to several camps, in Abby, and, you know, but what I noticed was she and Carla and Nzinga, every time they saw each other, they hugged each other so tightly. They were so happy to see each other. They put their heads together over everything. They were just spontaneously walking down the road when we go foraging, their linked arms around each other, and they're just strutting down the thing. They're always, you know, doing their little thing together. And that was organic. It wasn't anything that anybody said, oh, you got to play or you got to be with. No, they gravitated to each other immediately, found the commonness of each other and love for each other. And it's just awesome to watch. And the other kids too, they're watching each other. They're, you know, paying attention. Are you okay if they see somebody sitting by themselves or laying down, or, you know, somebody standing out? They go and immediately come over and, you know, come on over here. And they are very aware. And that's where it starts, making that awareness within these kids to each other. And they don't find the differences. That's the whole thing. They don't have differences until somebody tells them they're different and points it out and points it out as a negative. And then it becomes, oh, well, my parents said, but there's always those little souls that transcend all that, and they don't care what anybody says to them. In terms of the divine feminine rising, also we see, and that's part of prophecy of indigenous people, that there will be a time when women will lead, that women will take the forefront, where truth and justice cannot be denied. You cannot hide anything. Everybody's scandals, everybody's, whatever, on family levels, corporate level, whatever, country levels, it's all coming and bubbling to the surface. We have more female leaders in all aspects, and then we have the pushback, where that last bit of male dominant energy is saying, no, you can't be pastors in a church, then, and all of this crazy stuff, where, more women are being abused and assaulted, because as that balance takes place, that masculine energy that's warlike and all that's not going to go quietly into the night, but it is, pushing back. But that feminine energy within all of us, it's not just females. Males have feminine energy. We all have both energies that balance, but it's the use of that energy and understanding what that means and what that is, that brings forward this change. And so as it's coming, the men need to step up, and women, and I always say, everybody, and I've heard other people say this too, that everybody that looks like you ain't for you, and vice versa. And so we got to get past looks. We got to get past what where somebody comes from, their social, economic, whatever. That, somebody said to me years ago, birds of a feather flock together. She said spirits do too. So as those spirits come, we start to flock together, and we start to want to protect each other, and we want better. And the sad thing is that, yes, there's hurtful things that are going to come out. We have people that we considered heroes from all over, various people and whatever. Okay, that truth and justice, as it bubbles up and things are exposed, and the people are like, what? But on the other hand, we have to become allied with those people that are rising. We have to, people say all the time, well, how do you help what can we do for the Patuxent Riverkeeper? What can we do for this one, for that one? You can look at where your resources are going. People send money all the time to the big greens, and what are they doing? Then if you go and look at the salaries that those people are making, no, look at some smaller organization. If you just go and feed a neighbor, if you're aware that this elder down the street is in their house all the time and is eating cat food sometimes because that's all they can afford. If you make your consciousness expand to seeing more than what's in front of you and what your thing is. People say all the time, well, I can't afford this and I can't afford that. But you can go to a movie, you can go buy new clothes, you can, buy that bottle of wine or whatever. Instead, why don't you go feed somebody? Pay for somebody's school lunches that can't afford it. Are you looking at and I'm always asking young people, they're like, what can we do? What can we do? I said, look in your own neighborhood. Do you have elders in your neighborhood? Have you knocked on the door? Have you said, do you need help? Is there anything I can do for you? Do you just sit and give them companionship? Because everybody needs to be fed. So, and that means spiritually and, all other ways. But are you going to give your money to a organization that has huge salaries? Or are you going to look around and you're going to say, okay, what is this one doing? It makes people feel good to just give this money all the time to this one and that one, and they can get a bug or all that, and where all that money for the bugs and the shirts and all that stuff is coming from. That money could be used in ways that are improving and helping your rivers, your communities. We need to rethink capitalism, period. How is that affecting things? It's a feel-good thing to donate to these things, and you got a little sticker on your car that says you supported this, that, and the other. But what are you really supporting? Have you looked into that? And the best support is change your spirit, change your way of the way that you think, the way that you interact. If you're in gratitude and respect, so many of these other things will solve themselves, because things will change and people's nature and thing will change. But it's a tough job, and many people don't want to do the tough job. They want to do the glitzy stuff that looks good,
Thank you. Kelsey, you want to close us out?
Yeah, I got it.
And Kelsey, can I say one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, in the terms of the divine feminine, I just, with the way, with women rising and all, there's a singer called Monica. I never heard of her before. But I saw this thing on a YouTube feed and they were saying, you know, Monica spoke out because a woman in the audience was being abused. This singer stopped her concert because she saw a man in the audience hitting a woman, and she stopped it and she went down there and said, and reamed him but good, got security on him, had him arrested. And people were with their cell phones taping all this, so we all know about it. But what an awesome woman she is, that she would stop this concert, and that she was even aware that this was taking place and then did something about it. And that's all I'm saying is make our consciousness one like hers. I give her so many kudos. I just love her, you know, because there are so many of us that are stepping up all the time, every day, and nobody knows about it and hears about it. And we're not doing it for fame or, you know, for wealth per se, but there's a genuine feeling of love and respect for all the creation that makes people step up. And when you see somebody stepping up, take that as a lesson and look at yourself and say, am I stepping up too?
We're all getting connected.
And that's what you're doing.
Yes, we're connecting. And Fred, what you said about organization. In the 60s, we talked about rising consciousness, and we talked about organization, but we talked about organization in terms of a militarism that was not practical. We missed the movement, the moment in the movement in the 60s. Organization is what we have to do. And it's organizing around the very things that the both of you have spoken to today. Organizing around people's stories and people's lives, people's practical everyday. How do we support the people who don't have a voice? How do we give them voice? And how do we bring those voices together in the same space so that they can see one another and understand how powerful they really are? That's what I hear in the work that you're doing, the both of you are doing. And I just want to thank you for that work and thank you for this opportunity to be here with us this afternoon.
Thanks for the chance to talk about it. Believe it or not, there aren't that many forums to unpack all of these ideas. I mean, little bits and pieces here and there, but rarely all at once. So thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. My hero.
Kelsey.
Yes, I just want to echo the sentiments of deep appreciation. The one other thing I would expand upon that is from the conversation I've heard, beyond raising our collective consciousness about our connectedness and empowered capabilities as people, that we are integrated and integral with the environment, all life and earth around us, and that it is not just about the people or the environment, but it is a collective whole. And both really so grateful for your work and intentional communication that continues to bring that thread to light as well. And in wrapping up now, I would love to pass it over to Fred to have a lovely way to conclude this deep, rich conversation. Thank you for tuning in and contributing.
Everywhere I've gone, and I've been fortunate to go to a lot of places on this globe, I've always found life thriving in the most unlikely places. And one of my favorite snapshots is a picture of a bunch of dandelions growing on top of a rock. They found a way to do it. They figured out a way to thrive. And so this, I think, is an important lesson, is that life is the rule, not the exception. And so we should be mindful of that as human beings. We're a part of that continuum, a part of that cycle, but that we're connected to all life, and life is pretty much everywhere. As much as I was dissing on Mars earlier, they might lack water, but they still, I suppose, have life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's something we should really take to heart. As Rabia said, I think it's about humility, about being open, about knowing our own nature, and honoring that. So I don't know if that's profound, but that would be my parting thought.